There are hundreds of college basketball games on sports networks every year, and a lot goes into managing the productions to make sure the fan gets a great TV broadcast. My guest on this episode will tell us how he was able to make it all happen during his career, and we'll also find out what he looked for when hiring announcers. That's next on Sports in the Making. Thank you for listening to Sports in the Making, where we find out about people who work in the sports and broadcasting industry, find out what they do and how sports comes together. I'm your host, Don Cardona. This is episode 4. My guest on today's podcast has worked at the highest level, starting with the NCAA in their broadcasting department, working on many collegiate championships. And he spent most of his career as one of the coordinating producers for college basketball on ESPN's family of networks. He is currently the coordinating producer for Ross Mobile Productions, a packager that produces games for ESPN, Fox, NBC, and other networks. Since I've known him, he has a relentless amount of energy and has an impeccable memory for details. He has jump-started the careers of many well-known announcers that you hear calling games. Joining me now is Chris Farrow. We had the chance to catch up last December to talk about basketball and much more. Chris, how you doing?
Hey, good morning, Don. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, thanks. Before we get into your experience, I want to ask you, where do you get your love of sports?
Well, I'm actually not being able to play sports. I was a terrible basketball player, and I couldn't hit a jump shot in my life. And I used to watch a lot of sports on TV as a kid. My earliest memories of TV sports was definitely when I was 8 years old, when the Red Sox beat Cincinnati in the famous Carlton Fisk home run game, and my parents let me stay up late. And they had the neighbors over, and that's my first memory of sports on TV would have been, I guess it would have been the fall of '75 when I was about 8 years old.
And what did that do for you? Did you think you wanted to work in sports?
I don't remember. I just knew I used to love to go to games. My dad would take me maybe once or twice a year to Fenway, and I just grew to love the Boston sports teams. And as I got older, I remembered all the Larry Bird Sunday afternoon games on CBS, the 1 o'clock CBS game with their guys doing it. And it was great. It was appointment viewing for me. I didn't care if it was the Sixers and the Lakers or the Celtics and the Knicks. I always watched the 1 o'clock CBS Sports national game and then, kept up with the Red Sox for the year. So those are my favorite sports. And later in life, I would learn to like college football and pro football, but really started with, the Red Sox and the Celtics.
And how did that translate into you getting into the sports industry?
I didn't make the high school basketball team as a freshman, and I wanted to be involved with basketball. So I became the team manager in Ellington, Connecticut, with the head coach's name was Steve Edwards. He was the high school coach in Ellington. And I kept stats for 4 years for the team and was the manager. I got to go to every basketball game, home and away, and that was my winter activity. I ran cross country and track. I could run. That's the only thing I could do is I could run. And I attempted to play golf my junior year on the team, and I was terrible at it, but I got to play free golf at Ellington Country Club about 15 times.
So how did you get into the sports industry, and then how did you get into sports television?
I would say when I was a junior in high school, Coach Edwards said, you should look into sports information when you go to college. I go, what the heck is sports information? And he said, well, that's a department in the athletic department that, kind of manages all the media, with the athletes and coaches. Like, oh, that sounds really interesting. So I went out as a senior in high school and I actually went to like 4 colleges, like UConn, Eastern Connecticut, Springfield College, and Central Connecticut. And I interviewed SIDs in the profession. I wound up going to UConn, and my first day of college in late August of, this would be 85, I didn't go to the bookstore. I went to the athletic communications office, which was then called Sports Information, and volunteered to be a student assistant. I started going out and getting results from tennis matches. And then obviously UConn was in the Big East. So it really led me to connecting with the right people right away as a freshman, with people from Providence, from the Big East office, with people that were so influential in my career, like a Mike Gorman, who's still the Celtics play-by-play. His wife, Carrie Schindler, really was my big break. When the Big East added football in 1991, I was asked to come full-time in Providence, and it sucked me into TV sports, and that was it.
Was it easy for you, or did it just come natural?
I've always been a numbers guy, so keeping stats was natural to me, and from my high school years, as I mentioned. And then when I was asked to come font coordinate a game, I remember I guess it would be Chiron operator, was a guy named Doug Ryan, and it was I had no idea what I was doing. And I got there, and I knew to bring the media guides and the notes, but I didn't know what to expect. And once he realized I was a first timer, he was very patient with me. I remember him taking a piece of paper and a ruler and a pencil and said, "Just draw lines." I'm like, "What?" He said, "Just draw lines." And I'm like, "What?" And I go, "Make a grid." You want to make a grid. So he had me create my first ever font board. It was in Storrs, Connecticut. I was probably a sophomore in college. And I learned how to font coordinate that day. And that's really where it all started. Really, when I started fonting games, there's so many terms in the business for that. Like CBS calls them BAs and ESPN calls them APs. And the kind of the nomenclature is font coordinator. That's where it all started. That is where I kind of advanced from the talent stats, official stats kind of thing I was doing as a freshman to now you're fonting games and learning more about what happens inside a TV truck. That's where it all started.
So what were the next steps for you? Because you've done a lot in your career.
I did 5 years at the Big East from 90 to 95. I went to Creative Sports. So when the Big East stopped syndicating games in the original Big East network, when the Big East would hire the TV trucks and I would hire all the APs and stage managers and stats people, my early crewing days in Providence from like 91 to 95 for all the football and basketball games, it led me to Creative Sports, which would become the ESPN Charlotte headquarters. And that's where it kind of really, it took kind of a side turn. I went kind of from like dealing with all the production stuff and content really into an operations background when I turned down a couple of opportunities. I was offered to be the sports producer at WFSB in Hartford, a great CBS affiliate of my life growing up where I watched those NBA games. But I knew I didn't want to go to just do local sports. I felt like I was making connections on the East Coast. I was crewing these games in Miami and Virginia Tech and Boston. I'm like, I can't just stay in a vacuum here in Connecticut. I got to get out of here. And that's when I turned that job down. I turned down a job to go to ESPN to be a PA on the NFL draft. And I heard crazy stories about how hard it was. Not that I wouldn't take the challenge, but I just heard these crazy stories about it. And in a good way. Like, look, it's TV, it's sports, it's fun. But I held out, and I really wanted to stay with the Big East somehow, connected to the product. It's such a part of my life. And Jeff Montoni and Mike Wells and Lauren Matthews, rest his soul, all those guys, they hired me to come down to Charlotte and be part of the Creative Sports team where I would meet so many people that are part of my life now, like a Mike Moore and an Eric Swearens and so many more.
So you went to the NCAA a little bit later as manager of broadcasting, right?
I was. Well, I had a lot of different titles there. I think it was assistant director of broadcast services was technically my title. I got a call one day in the summer of 96 from Jim Marchione at the NCAA, and he says, "We're going to have an opening here. We'd like you to apply for it." I'm like, "Sure, I'll apply for it." They flew me out there in September of 96 to Overland Park from Charlotte. I went totally on the QT because I wasn't sure what was going to happen with the ESPN regional job or Creative Sports, as it still was. And they offered me a job. I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" Absolutely. So I gave my notice, gave them time. I remember I crewed all of the RPM racing show in Charlotte, like 200 dates with all the people that did such a good job on it in the first year before I left to kind of set them up to succeed. And that's when they went and found my replacement in Charlotte with another crewer. And I moved to Overland Park, Kansas. I actually moved to Olathe, Kansas first, which is right there, a suburb of Overland Park in Kansas City. And I got there in November of 96.
And what were some of your responsibilities there? Because I think you had some pretty impactful events.
The first thing I did actually was do a Women's College World Series site visit. And I had no clue as to what I was doing. Like, I had to go out to Oklahoma City with Christine Pohl, who was running the championship, and they asked me to go because we're going to go. They done some renovations or something happened. I just remember flying down there in Southwest. It was up and back in one day. And I had called a few people I know in the baseball side of things. I don't remember who they were, but they gave me some tips and tricks on camera numbers and just stuff I didn't know clue about because I'd never done baseball or softball, stick and ball, as we call it. And I went down there, and that was the first event. And then I get back the same day, and my boss tells me he wants me to go to Hawaii. NCAA Productions packages, at that time, they packaged the 4 volleyball regionals with some, I think it was Spalding official ball money. And I'm like, "You're kidding me. You want me to go to Hawaii?" He says, "Yeah, I'm going to go to Nebraska. Gina's going to go to Florida. Les is going to go to Stanford if these top seeds host." And I actually went to Hawaii to oversee the NCAA Productions packaging and producing the volleyball regionals and semifinals that we were syndicating on various affiliates. Like back then, it was like some of the old Fox affiliates and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, at the NCAA, I managed the relationships with our partners like ESPN and CBS and Westwood One and CSTV through the years. We had a great team of people. Jim Marcioni was my original boss, and then JoJo Reinbold came in. And, then we moved to Indianapolis in the summer of '99. The NCAA moved their headquarters from Overland Park, Kansas to NCAA, and I made the move with my first wife who worked at the NCAA, and we moved here, and it was a great run, like running all the championships, traveling to site visits, doing PSAs, really. And there was a part of the ESPN NCAA contract that stipulated that NCAA production shall produce certain events. So there were certain events that I oversaw for 7 straight years during that kind of current part of that early contract when I worked at the NCAA. So I always went to the Women's College World Series. I never was in Indianapolis for the Indy 500. I was always in Oklahoma City. I always went to the hockey regionals. I always went to the soccer championships, the college cups, the tennises. There's just some championships I went to like for 7 straight years because they were part of the ESPN relationship, or there was some additional dollars to do things. So there was probably about 100 event games, or maybe 150 a year that we always did. And it was unbelievable. We were doing the early rounds of the women's tournament before ESPN started doing all 63 games. And those are some of the craziest stories. I don't think we have time to get into just in terms of crazy stuff on the court and crazy reviews. This crazy UCLA women's game this one year in Alabama with the refs, and it was just nuts. It's TV sports. It's fun.
What's the relationship between the NCAA broadcasting and the networks? Is it a cohesive one, or is it territorial?
Yeah, I was really part of the ESPN stuff. I very rarely touched the CBS stuff because it was really at a higher level with the men's basketball staff managing that relationship. Yeah, we came into contact with them for certain things through the years. I did, at least in my personal job, but I mainly was dealing with the ESPN stuff. It's totally professional. Everybody gets along. Everybody in the business is friends. And look, we both had jobs to do. I've been on both sides of the fence where when you're at the NCAA, you're representing the membership. You're representing the student athletes' best interest. You're representing the coaches, the SIDs. So you want to make sure that comes first. Yet you want to make sure also that your partner's happy and they can get into maybe a locker room or they can get a walk-off interview. And those are all the things, or the scheduling was so tricky. It was so tricky doing the scheduling. And, sometimes you have to have somebody play volleyball at 10 p.m. Eastern time because the first match at 7:30 went really long. And I won't say the team, but I got absolutely laid out by a Division I women's volleyball coach because the game was so late. And it's just one of those things. I just took a beating. And I remember the guys in the truck have the whole thing on tape, and I came back and they played it for me and were making fun of me. But you stand your ground, you be professional, and you try to be a good listener. And that's one thing I tried to do through the years, is just listen to people and make sure we can find a good resolution.
How did you move on from the NCAA and get to ESPN?
I applied I was ready to move on from the NCAA. So because I needed to advance, I needed to go somewhere to kind of get my butt kicked. Because all the NCAA productions events we packaged and produced, I wasn't getting any feedback on. And I didn't know if I was getting better, just staying stagnant, staying the same. And the best feedback I got was from some of my freelance producers and directors, some of my best friends in my life now in the business, like a Jerry Weinstein or Steve Turnberg on the West Coast, or Lori Mancini on the East Coast. These guys would watch my games and say, hey, nice opener, the tease was too long, or why don't you get the action quicker? Like, it was the best feedback I got was from my friends in the business. And I wasn't getting that in Indianapolis. So I said, I got to get out of here. So I started hatching this plan to start my own business. And I outsourced myself to myself. Greg Wiedekamp, then director of the Broadcast Services Department, or whatever our adjective was at the time in the world at the NCAA, let me craft a plan to take part of my job with me and start working from home in Indianapolis. And what I did is I took all the packaging stuff and really started my first Farrow Productions company. And I did that for 11 months. And it was really good, but it was kind of boring because I was alone at home and I missed the interaction with people. And I still had keys to the NCAA warehouse. I still went down there, did all the dubs, did my stuff, getting melts out to the trucks, packing my own bins, shipping stuff out, whatever it takes to do the NCAA productions games. And I was also doing the video board loop tapes. The NCAA video boards for years really just sat stagnant with just like a logo up there. And I saw an opportunity to create content, entertain the people. So I created this monster in my last few years at the NCAA where I started making loop tapes to entertain people. And I had audio loop tapes and non-audio loop tapes. So the non-audio loop tapes, you could just play them and the in-house people could put music and talk over them. Or if you had maybe a school that didn't have a big staff, I would put popular music laid down over just like information panels about upcoming championships or trivia questions or just fun stuff, just to kind of keep people occupied. And that was so fun doing that. And then, doing stuff like producing the College World Series and being in charge of all the music was like one of the greatest moments of my life. And I remember the UNC coach wrote the NCAA after losing to Oregon State, asking who did the music at the College World Series. I want that set list. And I actually emailed him a nice note, and I felt like I made it. I did a good job.
Yeah.
So I got sucked to Charlotte when I guess it would be John Vasallo or Mike Moore, one of the two people called me, or they called me together and said, we want you to apply for a coordinating producer job down here. I'm like, yeah, I'll do that. That sounds great. And long story short, I got the job, and I guess it would be the summer of '06. I moved from Indianapolis to Charlotte, where I would take over kind of being the day-to-day running college basketball for ESPN Regional Television, which is the second year of ESPNU. ESPNU launched in 3-4-05, and then, in the second kind of full season of it would be like '06-'07 is when I kind of came on board and really became the ESPNU CP, the syndication CP, and all the things associated with college basketball at the worldwide leader in sports.
And this is where it gets interesting for me, because I had not had any experience with ESPNU, and I'd always wanted to be a part of it with college basketball or any of the college sports. But when I finally got integrated into that world, it was a different landscape for me altogether because of how many games there are, how complex it is to put everything together, how you do things operationally, and how much goes into it. So how many events did you oversee while you were there at ESPN?
The best way to describe it, just in a basketball sense, I'd say the first 2 or 3 years, it was about 500 games a year, because at the time, Bristol and Charlotte were really two silos. There was a little bit of overlap with basketball, but really Dan Steer and Kerry Willis had their chart, and then in Charlotte, we had our chart, and there was a little bit of overlap because sometimes ESPN Regional would produce a game on ESPN2, so the information populating on two different charts. So in the early days, it was probably 500 until probably like year 3 or 4 or 5. I started really getting more indoctrinated into like both worlds, and eventually we would merge both charts together. And I would say that's probably about year 5 or 6 of my 11 and a half years at ESPN. And when the charts merged together, it became 12 or 1,300 games a year. So it's fair to say that somehow I crewed, watched, helped, anything with it. It was a single basketball game at ESPN, probably to the point where it was probably over 12,000 games over the 11 and a half years, maybe more.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt it. So what did it take to manage all those games, and how did you do it?
I was single at the time, and when you're single, you make your own schedule. So I could work 80 hours a week, and I could do the job. And I was young. I was hungry. It was just like I loved it. I was learning so much every day from people. And the number one thing is you can't do it alone. Like you surround yourself with great people. I didn't have a production coordinator in my first year, which was, I look back and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that alone. And then I got Ann Morgan, a great production coordinator with me for so many years. And it was almost, so we used to joke, we were like Batman and Robin. We just did everything work-wise. She was the same work ethic as me. And you surround yourself with good people. You try to like jockey for like good PAs when they have the internal draft of who's going to work on one sport. You take on, a lot of times basketball, always take on new people because, football and soccer and baseball and baseball and softball all want their people because they want to do well too. So I never had a problem taking on a green PA or somebody new. And we always, we trained them and we figured it out. And, it's just basketball. It's just entertainment. It's not like we're doing anything crazy hard. It's just like, okay, yeah, we need a few clips sent to that game. We don't have any edit time. Like, make sure they get the elements and the mic flags and the banners, and let's be organized with that stuff. Let's just get on the air and not really stress about like great content so much early on in the season. As we kind of get your sea legs under you, you start doing more stuff that's fun because people are good at their jobs and you can start pushing the envelope a little bit more. So always like November, just get on the air clean and make sure everyone gets the elements because all the top producers are probably out working football right now until we get them back in January. But really, just surround yourself with great people. Like, everyone from our partnerships internally, like with the program department, I think was really the most critical piece to the whole thing, as they shared information with so many great people in programming that were part of my college basketball era at ESPN. And the one that comes to mind, easy, the number one person sharing information, always giving me heads up, is a young lady named Lindsay Ross, who's no longer at ESPN. She's at Flow Sports in Austin. But when you have good people around you and they give you early info, like you got to have a game in this day and time, or this game's happening, when you get that info in August to September, you're able to start plotting who you need and how you can save money and who's local. And it just worked. It was really great. Everything from operations to travel. You succeed by surrounding yourself and connecting with good people.
Well, as we all probably know, ESPN's experienced a lot of growth with college basketball, and you are a big part of that. So what does that mean to you?
Well, I'm still doing games, and I've worked for ESPN in some capacity, whether it was official stats on a big Monday game in my freshman year of college in 1985-86 to I recently in November actually produced 7 basketball games on various networks, everything from ESPN2 to ESPN Plus to ESPNU, and it literally has changed my life. The 11 and a half years that I ran college basketball and all my preaching and all my things that I learned from my mentors like a Dan Steer or an Ed Placey or Mike Moore and John Basala, all the people that shaped my convictions, my, get to action quicker, like don't hold them out of break, like just make sure that the score is the most important thing, having that in for the fans, all those things. It's made it so easy for me to continue to just talk about basketball with you right now because it's so ingrained in me from over a decade of being in Charlotte.
Well, you've definitely made an impact on viewers and those behind the lens. And so one of the things I've noticed talking with you over the last few days is you're a master documentarian. You don't forget. It seems like you don't forget anything. So where do you get that from?
I don't know how I got the organization gene, but somebody in the Farrow family had the organization gene, and it passed on to me because I think it might have started when I had paper routes. I used to deliver the Journal-Enquirer in Manchester, Connecticut, which is a great afternoon paper that I would read, I would guess in the 80s, all the time I was younger, high school, and I loved it because it had the West Coast baseball scores. Because the paper would come about 3 o'clock. I get home from school or from cross-country practice, and I get to JI, and, there's no internet then. You don't have the internet. You can't just, who won? And I get the paper, and I started, reading the paper and and I started delivering the paper, and I had to keep the money organized. And I started, hey, I have 20 houses, and, these guys owe me this much money, and these guys so I had a spreadsheet. It was like my earliest spreadsheets were because I was trying to keep the paper route money organized.
Well, and the reason I bring that up is because you sent me your concert list recently of all the concerts that you've attended in your life, and every single one of them was documented, starting with your first one in 1979 in Massachusetts, which was Kiss and Judas Priest. Do you remember that first concert?
I do. I remember who drove me. I remember who I went with. I went with my best friend, a guy named Kelly Hughes, and his parents took us, Dorothy and Jerry. We went to Springfield Civic Center. It was right before my 12th birthday, so it was days away from being 12. We sat straight across in the lower level, and I remember we kind of half booed Judas Priest off the stage because we wanted to see Kiss. It was in the Dynasty Tour. It would be the last tour that they wear makeup before they did the famous unveiling. I think it was on MTV, like in the early 1980 or something. I was mesmerized. Like that Kiss Alive 2 album, when you open it up, and you see the explosions and the pyrotechnics. If you don't want to go buy a ticket to see them, something's missing there. So that was it. That was the first one. And I didn't go to a concert in 1980, but since 81, including last year, I've gone to at least one rock concert every single year for as many years as it is. And actually, it's funny, I don't have one yet in the books. I've not gone to one in 19, and I just noticed Great White is coming. And if I don't go to that, my streak will be over.
Well, and according to your list, you've attended 276 concerts in your lifetime. If it's any indication by the numbers, your favorite artist is Sammy Hagar.
Yeah, he'd be the guy. I mean, I've always liked his solo music. And when he joined Van Halen, it was just such a natural, and it became my band. I love that band. Again, people have their strong opinions. Certainly Diamond Dave, what a great run. But Sammy could sing. I mean, Sammy could sing like there's no tomorrow over David Lee. And it was like the whole 5150, the whole era of Van Hagar to me was like my best recollections of concerts were always going with my friends from New England and Connecticut to see Sammy Hagar, whether they're playing in Greatwood, they're playing in the Hartford Civic Center, the old in the old New Haven Coliseum. We would see them everywhere. Providence, Rhode Island. That was the band. I mean, that was my guy, whether he's solo or with DH. And I remember the day I heard that they were breaking up, I was in a taxi cab leaving Providence from the ESPN Extreme Games. It was called Extreme Games back then, going to the Providence airport, and the rock station in Providence had announced this, and I was stunned. I mean, it was like, I was like, I didn't do. I was so depressed after that. And like, my band broke up.
Yeah.
And to me, that was like literally to me was probably what Beatles fans felt when they broke up.
Well, it's incredible to me how you remember those details, because when we got back in touch after about 7-8 years now, you remembered the event and the date that we first worked together.
Well, it would have been, you produced a college basketball game in Mexico it was January of 2010. So you were down there with our guys doing the game, and you went down because we were looking for a bilingual producer to go into a foreign country and produce an NCAA Division I college basketball game between Seton Hall and Virginia Tech at what would be a ESPN owned and operated event, kind of test run in Cancun. And I don't think we met, but we talked in the fall of 2009. And I think we got to you from Charlotte when we were talking to maybe like Dan Steer, the longtime ESPN basketball CP. And we talked about this event, and we knew we had to find somebody from ESPN International. And whoever he led us to you, and you were volunteered to go down there for the company.
Yeah, well, I got to tell you that, and I said it earlier, when I got ingrained into the college basketball world, it did open my eyes to how complicated college basketball is, and all the games that you have, all the producers, all the directors, all the announcers that you have to fit in, and just the logistics of everything with the tournaments and all the owned and operated events. So if you can, share what that world is like. How do you put that together for a season?
It's really done simply through an Excel chart, and there are so many people that help you build that Excel chart, and there's operations columns, and there's columns for the APs and ADs that your production coordinator hires, and there's the columns for the producer and the director and the announcers that the CP myself would hire. So everybody has a role. We proofread these things with operations like they're going out of style. We make sure we have the exact venue, the exact time. There's a column for tip times. There's a column for how many cameras in the later years. There's a column for everything. If there's a set day, if there's a dark day, if there's a slider on it, which is the computer that generates the pop-up with like people's numbers, like Don Cardona, 30 points, 15 rebounds. I just gave you a double-double.
Yeah. So when you're trying to fill spots with producers, directors, and announcers, what is it you look for?
Well, it depends. I mean, it depends what your budget is and what your situation is. So let's take the Big East Network. That was kind of my first kind of, in the ESPNU game. So let's take the Big East Network. We tried to regionalize. So as I'm hiring people in my first year at ESPN, like 06, 07, and I'm learning from Mike Moore about syndication and about what would become the Big 12 network, the Big East Network, these syndication networks. Back then it was just branded ESPN Plus, but it's essentially that's what they became a few years later. You have to keep people regionally. You have to keep people off planes. You have to know that there's winter coming with storms and blizzards and snow and ice and canceled flights, and you have to try to crew people regionally. And that was my number one thing I did. I was always trying to find people who were kind of close and local. And, whether it was a producer doing a game at Providence, Rhode Island, or Storrs, Connecticut, or Boston College, you would have people, and I had depth charts that were sortable by region. It was all in Excel. I created my own geography zones, and I just started putting people on charts and realizing that this chart's going to be my playbook like a head coach for years to come. And that's what it became. I still have all those depth charts on memory sticks, all the people, and I even have an active depth chart in my current job I do today, which I know we'll talk about in a minute. But that's how you do it. You keep organized, and you rank your people, like who's your number one New England producer, who's your number two New England producer, who's your number one person in Florida. And sometimes you don't have anybody, so you have to fly people in. So there were flights involved, and people aren't always available. But that's how I did it. I really kept
Yeah.
it organized with who was doing games before, who can I bring in new, and where do they live, and let's try and save money because these games weren't giant budgets. You want to do these games cost effectively, but still at a good quality.
Yeah. Well, and the other part of that too is if you bring somebody else new in, you have to provide them some feedback and analysis. How do you do that?
Honestly, I just go to follow them. I talk to them. It's training. It's going through stuff. It's being a good listener. It's answering their questions. And I'm sure I did it with you. It's just, some people have the skill set to get into a truck and do the game, but there's so many nuances and rules and this promo and this Disney Plus promo and this execution and this promo power and this and that and other thing. There's so much information. It's overwhelming. And I've been on both sides of it. So when you're on the side of it and you're making it for the people, you try to make a really good WebEx that if they miss your conference call, they can look at it and really understand what they need to do. And then we took it to another level a few years ago when we started using a call service to tape the calls. And that way, if you missed the conference call, you could go back that night. Mine were bi-weekly Thursdays. You could go back on Thursday night by dinner time, and you could play back the conference call from that day and watch the WebEx and not feel stressed out about missing the call because maybe you have a doctor's appointment or you're on a plane or something. So you set people up to succeed. And now that the Bristol and Charlotte has merged with basketball, they're still using that same conference call service. And I missed the conference call recently as a, kind of being on the other side now. And I used the playback feature. It was great. I felt like I was caught up and I was dialed in and it was great. So you do it by setting people up to succeed, by giving them the proper tools to do the job, and being
Right.
available and being open-minded to their calls at any time of the day to take their calls and questions to help them do what they need to do.
Okay, so I get a lot of questions, having been a coordinating producer myself. A lot of people want to be talent. They want to be calling a specific sport, or they want to do, something else. And what I find is a lot of the younger people think that it's the big call. It's how well you can describe a play that's happening. But there's so much detail that goes in, especially with baseball, where there's a lot of dead time. You need to fill out that time with stories. So when you're working with talent and trying to advise them on how to be a better announcer, what's your philosophy or what's your outlook on that?
When I look for a new announcer or when I'm looking at tapes, now you got to remember, this is back in the day we were getting DVDs in and we were getting VHS tapes, and this isn't links like it is today.
Right.
So I had a box with all the stuff in it that would just keep coming in. And I think early on I tried to organize it in a chart, and I realized there's too many. I need to keep my charts of people working with me accurate. I can't do this. So I just kept putting them in a box. And in the springtime, we would take that box and we'd go into a large conference room. And remember the old Gong Show with Chuck
Right.
Berry?
Mm-hmm.
We would joke and we say, we're having Gong Show sessions. And we would take all the tapes and DVDs, some of the other CPs down there, some of the other great people I worked with. And we'd go in there and we'd go in for 2 or 3 hours and we'd get pizza and get some waters or sodas and we start firing them in. And literally, you're looking for maybe 2 or 3 out of 100 that you think you're going to give a shot to. And that's what it really was. It was like for every 100, about 2 or 3 people with somebody that we're going to try in the next basketball season, or maybe football or whatever. But for me, it was mainly basketball because that's what I worked on. And it's funny, sometimes you see somebody's real and you actually like the person they're working with better and you try to find their information. So it was so funny. And it's just like, that's how we did it. It's subjective, it's voice quality, it's on-camera presence, it's all the things. And you're right, you talked about the glitz reels with the great home run calls or great dunks. And those are great too. Those are fun to people. But honestly, you have to listen to the game. So whenever I talk to somebody and they say, hey, can I send you my demo reel? I'd say, actually, I prefer a whole basketball game or a half a basketball game. I'm actually going to randomly go DVD, forward chapter, fix, and see where I land in the first half. And I'm going to listen for 5 or 10 minutes. I'm going to make my decision. That's how I did it.
Well, you also have your own production company working with announcers and talent to help them get better. What are the things you help them with?
Yeah, and once I left ESPN and I restarted Chris Farrow Productions, working from home, consulting, lots of things, most of that consulting has been talent feedback and evaluation. We've probably done 35 or 40 people. So we have different rates for different levels of your experience level. You have a college rate, you have a your first job rate, and we have, if you're a seasoned veteran, we have the veteran rate. So we try to give people different opportunities to get better, depending on where you are in your career. So I always tell people, you got to send me 3 full games. If you're going to have me evaluate your stuff, I want 3 full games. Now, it's different for reporters. We'll talk about that in a minute. But obviously, if you're a play-by-play or analyst, we want 3 full games. So I would split it up with, again, I keep mentioning Mike Moore. Mike works for us and does some evaluation. So we split the games up. We evaluate it. We type up notes. No different than what we used to do at ESPN for people when we had to give them feedback. We try to look for 2 or 3 themes that they do well, or maybe 3 or 4 things they got to get better at. And we email it to them before we have a call. We have a call with them. We run through everything. We answer their questions. We tell them our advice and tips about demo reels, about websites, about social media, about how to connect with people without giving I'm not giving people's phone numbers or emails away, but kind of like how do you be business smart? How do you succeed? What are the things you need to do on air? And that's what I do. It's like all the things I learned at the NCAA, at Creative Sports and ESPN, all these great jobs I've had, Big East, just translate them into like being able to help people and give them advice. And that's what I'm doing. Just a little consulting thing. Like it's fun to do. It's very time consuming, and it's hard to do when you're having a full-time job around it.
What makes a good play-by-play announcer?
For me, it's got to be the voice quality. I have to like the voice. It's very subjective. Sometimes I get these reels and the total, what we call announcer voice, is over the top. We'll sell you the whole seat, but you only need the edge, that kind of thing. Where to me, it's voice quality. Like Jason Benetti is a great one. I never knew his backstory, and he sent me his reel, and I liked it. I'm like, I like this guy. I liked where he lived. He was in Syracuse. I go, I need a Syracuse guy. I don't have a play-by-play guy up there. We get clobbered with the weather. We're always bringing people from Connecticut or New York or Boston. I like this guy. I'm going to give him a shot. And I gave him the shot, and I hadn't met him yet until 7 or 8 years ago. And he came to visit me in Charlotte, and I had no idea, with his disability, I had no idea. And that didn't change me at all. He was still going to call games at the Carrier Dome. He was still going to do the last Big East game at the Carrier Dome, regular season. He was still going to do, I think he did the Bayhigh 900 game. And he's been a great friend of mine. He's got the same birthday as me. We stayed in touch, and he's just one of probably, 100 plus announcers that got their first game from me and our team in Charlotte at the time.
Now, by voice quality, do you mean the sound of the voice or the conversationalism of what's going on?
Yeah, just how the person articulates himself. I don't need over the top. It needs to be conversational, but you got to be able to have the energy. You got to be able to raise your energy level on a big call. So it just can't be boring. And it's hard to explain. It's just so subjective.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm like, this is like kind of vanilla. We've got this person already. Obviously, diversity and women doing play-by-play is such an important part of any national sports network,
Yeah.
And all those things factored in all those years.
What about an analyst? Because they're in a unique spot where they've most likely played the sport, right?
Yeah, here's the thing: is we get so many coaches that get let go, and they get guaranteed money from their college or university. Hey, they get paid $30 million over 5 years because they got let go. But they want to stay involved in basketball, and the easy answer there is to be an analyst. So certainly, if you're a big name and you can, duck away for 2 or 3 years while you're collecting your money, and most of them have the offset deal, so it doesn't matter whether they're making $1,000 a game from the network or $2,000 a game, because most of the time that money's deducted from their school they got fired from, and they're still making the same money. So to them, the money part's really the easy part, because it's not a big deal. It's knowing that you're only going to have them for 1 or 2 years. That's the issue. Is they're going to go back. They got the bug. So it's kind of like having a potential superstar on your team that you're going to lose. And whether it was Mark Gottfried, Dino Gaudio, the list goes on. We had Steve Lavin for years, and then he went to Fox. But so many great former coaches who have what it takes to be on the air. A little bit of a character, a little bit of they have a little fun. They don't have to prove they know the game, because we know they know the game. They've got 350 career wins in the Big East or whatever it is. It's, can you make them better?
Right.
Can they come in the studio and be clear, concise, and effective with their communication when they when they get an under 4 toss to studio, and they're going to have like 12 seconds to talk. Can they say something really good in 12 seconds that wants to bring you back and suck you back to halftime? It's hard.
As a talent evaluator, do you go after them? Do they come after you? Is it a combination of both?
It's a little bit of both. It really, again, at ESPN now they have the talent office, and they do such a great job of talking to the agents and directly even to some of the coaches. So it's a little bit of both. Sometimes somebody knows them. Sometimes, hey, maybe I produced the game with a certain coach, and he's got my number, and his first contacts with me, or it's a Bristol person they know, or it's somebody in programming, or one of our great executives that I used to work with. So a lot of it's like that. Like the one I remember probably is Coach Godfrey, when I guess he'd be coming from Alabama, and Pete Thursas called me and said, "Can we get Coach Godfrey to game in the NIT?" I'm like, "That's a great idea. I love it." So we put him on a game. I can't remember where it was. You got me on this one. I'd have to pull the chart out. But he did a game, would have been in the NIT, and we put him with a really good producer that knew X's and O's. Like we set Coach up to succeed. And then he did so many years with ESPN and coming into Charlotte in the studio and Bristol and games and just stuff like that. Even like a Dino Gaudio, same thing. Dino, same drill, got let go from Wake, called me, stayed in touch, and going into the next season, when it would have been his first season at ESPN, I just said, "Hey, keep the suit pressed. There's always ice. There's always something happening. Somebody can't get in here." And sure enough, I don't know who it was, but they couldn't make it for a studio shift. And I called him up. He's up in Winston-Salem, his house still. And he came down, and we just threw him into the fire. And that was it. He's on the air. You're on the air. And that's it. And then Dino would do 8 years at ESPN, on air as an analyst, game, studio, everything. And then things change, lots of things evolve. ESPN news evolved. Dino would go back to coach with Coach Mack, would go to Louisville and hire Dino. And we stay in touch with him. But again, you lose a coach. The coaches go back. They go back to coach, and there's always the next coach. And there's whoever it is, somebody great coaches, but most of them want to go back. They got it in their blood. They want to coach. So it's like,
right.
You're always starting over again.
Okay. So finally, a field reporter or a sideline reporter. What do you do to evaluate them?
Yeah, when you're doing 10,000 plus basketball games, you don't have reporters on them. So honestly, the very few ones that do, for whatever reason, because maybe a school had a tragedy or you want to cover the story, or all those years, we had Andy Katz living in West Hartford, Connecticut, and he would bounce on the UConn games or the Providence games or the games at MSG because on the Big East Network, because people love basketball too. When you're looking for people, it's hard. You want, obviously, great on-camera presence. Obviously, diversity is so important at any company these days. So a lot of factors went into it as you evaluate tapes. And again, most of the great reporters at all the networks, including ESPN, a lot of them come, from your talent scouting and your talent office and developing there. So many of them. So ESPN's got an A-list of people, and I was lucky to work with a handful. I didn't have a lot of reporters on the air on my game, so it's really hard to say. I'd say later on, when I really got more confident in the job, like let's take Kentucky. It's a big blue nation, and games are so highly watched and viewed in that part of the country, in the SEC and just nationally. We started putting reporters on all of the SEC Network Kentucky games. And really, I got the ability to try some people out and to give them a shot and to give them games, or give maybe like a current analyst, like throw them a couple games to be the reporter, like a Brooke Weisbrod out of Chicago, former Big South Player of the Year, a great friend of mine. She would do these Kentucky games as a reporter, and she's normally an analyst on men's and women's games. Stormy Buonantonio, another one I just met. She's 25, 26-year-old up-and-comer, and I threw on a couple of Kentucky games before I left ESPN about 2 years ago now, and now she just started out in Las Vegas. She's the ringside reporter for the RSN out there, traveling with the team charter, doing 80 games a year. I'm like, I feel like I kind of jump-started her career a little. I love that story. So, so many people like that. And if I could ever document all of them, on paper, I could probably do it by looking at all my charts that I saved and just look A to Z at all the names and just try to figure out, yep, there's another one, yep, there's another one, yep, there's another one. And
well, that's your next project.
yeah, I don't know about that. I still got to do some renovations around the house.
Yeah, I definitely know that feeling. So you're now with Ross Mobile Productions. Explain what you do now and how you got there.
Ross Mobile Productions is a national sports packager, entertainment packager. There are probably 35, 40, 50 packagers around the country that do games for a lot of different networks, from Fox, ESPN, to NBC, CBS, the list goes on. I got to Ross through Neil Gallo, and Neil got me to Mitch Rubenstein. And Mitch started Ross in his garage, building a TV truck in the back of a van. And when I was at ESPN, Ross was one of the 6 packagers that I would assign games to and farm games out. So when I left ESPN, I got recruited to come work at Ross.
Explain what packaging is for some of our audience who may not know.
We bring the TV truck and the crew out there and we do the game. That's it. We bring our Sprinter van, TV truck, loaded with state-of-the-art Ross gear. We go out to a venue, hook up all the cameras and tables and 20, 25 people there, engineers, production people, and we produce the game. We produce the game that airs on ESPNU or ESPN Plus or ESPNU, and we do the game. And that's with a glut of sports on TV these days, especially college sports. There's so many games on. The networks can't do them all themselves. There's too many. So they farm them out to packagers or control rooms, and that's how it happens.
Well, and the future of television as well, we've discussed, is a lot of universities are building out their own control rooms and supporting themselves to handle these things. And that's pretty much the model for the SEC, the ACC, Longhorn Network.
Yeah, and many others to come. I mean, the American's going to do it. The Big Ten and the Pac-12 have their control rooms and their, it's various acronyms for all these at-home productions or Micers or REMIs, all these acronyms, and they all mean the same thing.
Right.
They mean that the producer, director, PD, graphics, AD, production staff is all somewhere else. And the people on site are the camera people, the utilities. You still need a timeout coordinator, red hat, to control the game, an audio person to mix it from site. And it's just a question. Are the announcers at the game or are the announcers in the studio back home? And different networks do it different ways.
Yeah.
Some networks they don't hide it. They just put them in a studio and they put them on camera in the studio. And you don't really notice that they're not really at the game. You think, hey, they have a really good backdrop at the site, but they're really in a studio in Chicago. ESPN now, pretty sure they do nearly 100% with at least basketball where they have them on site. And it's just different. It's a cost-saving, effective way of doing it. It's technology, it's efficiency, it's saving money, it's keeping people off planes.
Right.
And honestly, a lot of these networks, people have embraced it. First, it was like, oh my God, I'm not going to get my airline miles. Oh my God, I like to travel. But really, some of these people are getting a little older. They have kids, they have families. You know what? It's not a bad gig. You go there on Saturday at noon, maybe the game's at 3 o'clock, and you're done at 6:30, your football game, and you're home at 7 o'clock. I mean, you're watching games at home on Saturday night. You're with your family. It's pretty cool. It's really just one more way to do a game. There's so many different ways to do a game. Control rooms, at-home productions, packagers, full-blown on-site. Every company is trying to save money and be efficient. We have so many combo positions now. Like back in the day, having a single producer AD was unheard of, but now it's just the norm. Now you have the producer doing the job of 2 people. Now you have the director doing the job in the TD, a combo. At Ross, we do the combo thing. You have the EIC as the tech manager. You have the graphics operator with our state-of-the-art expression platform with the associate producer, the font coordinator, doing 2 jobs at once. So now the crews that used to be 35 people are really like 27 or 26 people. So we've whittled it down. Less travel, less costs, less chance of someone not being there, and just being efficient. That's what we do at Ross. We have packaged games in 45 states now, have been to numerous countries like the Bahamas, Mexico for some boxing, for Golden Boy, Canada multiple times. This Saturday in November of 2019, we had events in the same day in 3 different countries, which is really, really cool for our company. A really nice perk, and just kudos to Mitch and the kingdom he's built with the support from David Ross in Canada.
Well, I've actually worked out of one of your trucks covering the Chicago Marathon, we worked with WMAQ in Chicago, taking their feed and passing it through to NBCSN, and also we acted as the world feed for that truck.
So what did you think of it? Let me put you on the spot. What did you think of the Roth Sprinter van setup? Because I wasn't in Chicago for either one of those. I'd like to go to it. What did you think of it?
I liked it. You know, it's small, but it's cozy, and it has all the equipment that you could need to produce a television show. And it definitely suits those who are multifaceted as far as producer, director TD. And the equipment is fantastic. So, you know, it's a fun little truck, and I see the future of it for a lot of productions that want to save costs. Great.
We should bring it to our next summer company summit. Thank you for saying those nice things.
All right. So just a couple of minutes left here with us, but I just wanted to get a couple of things from you. What's the biggest or most memorable event you've covered?
I'm going to say a few and be quick with them. So definitely the 1995 Women's Final Four, when Sean McDonough had me be his talent stats person, and I got to go to Minnesota, and CBS actually paid me like $350 a game. I thought that was all the money in the world to do talent stats on 3 games, and I watched my alma mater win their first basketball championship, first of 15 basketball championships that they have these days between the men's and the women's. Rebecca Lobo, Gino Ariema, all the great players on that team. I was so excited to be there. What a thrill. And then I remember rushing off the court to go in the limo to all catch our flights, and I was like, I couldn't stick around to watch them cut the nets down, but I was there. I saw the celebration when they beat Tennessee. Then the number 2 one would have to be 04 when UConn pulled the double. Now, I was working the women's, but I went to the men's in San Antonio. So I'm working the women's. So this is back when the women's ended after men's. So I was at the women's New Orleans, like 11th row center in San Antonio alone, watching them win their second national title. And then they come back. And this is the moment when they pulled the double. When UConn women win 04, they pulled the double and they won. It was like the greatest. It was like we owned basketball. I was so proud of being a UConn alum. And I remember the next day I flew to Boston to do the Frozen Four. The banquet was in Fenway, like with the greatest teams there with BC and Michigan. And it turned out to be like the greatest 10-day work trip ever. It was like, you paid me to do this? I just went to see UConn. You just paid me to go, other than me cashing my miles, to go to San Antonio. And then I went to D.C. I'm in Fenway Park for the banquet, which we mentioned earlier. It's such a special part of my life. And then we were at the New Garden with the Frozen Four with B.C. and Michigan in it. It was a great weekend, and Michigan deserved to win. Seeing so many College World Series, Women's College World Series, and I would say definitely all of the great NCAA championships. Hockey, so many great events through the years. And really recently I'm most proud of working at that PK 80 event 2 Thanksgivings ago. Thanksgiving of 17, there was a collection of 16 teams in Portland, Oregon, and to be around Duke, North Carolina, UConn, Texas, Michigan State, the list goes on, Florida, all the great Nike schools. It was a great way to cap my career up to worldwide leader in sports.
What about the craziest?
Well, it's always weather related, and it's typically from blizzards and ice storms in the Northeast, where I have lived and worked most of my professional career in the early days. And the first one that comes to mind is a crazy blizzard. I was at the Big East Network. We had to get the commercial reel to Madison Square Garden, so somebody was playing St. John's. It might have been like Georgetown, St. John's, Big East Network, and FedEx is not going. I mean, they're shut down. Everything's like it's morning, they're shut down, and the game's at night. And Ron Perry, former Holy Cross guard, was going to take the train from Boston to New York, but the train goes through Providence. So I called him the night before and I said, I'm going to meet you at the train station in Providence and hand you this package. He goes, how will I know where to meet you? I go to the last cart. I don't know what that really means, but that way we're at go to the very last cart and I'll go to the very end of the train. So sure enough, he pulls up. I mean, it's blizzard-like. And I hand him a small box with the commercial reel, the mic flags, and boom, he's off. He makes it, and we run the spots and keep all the Big East Network sponsors happy. The second one would have to be also related to New York City, but it was a different year. It was a crazy blizzard. I'm working that weekend down there with the conference office, and I had done my part already on the syndication games. We would do the Thursday, Friday games, and it's Saturday, and I'm sitting courtside for the semifinals of the Big East tournament with Rich Savatkin, longtime play-by-play guy of the Georgetown Hoyas. He would do every game. No matter who's in it, he would do it back to the affiliate in D.C. And I sat with him, and the roof started leaking. and it was late in the first half. I think it was Syracuse St. John's, and I handed him the best talent stats note ever when I said that St. John's will have the ball in the second half with the water with offense. And he read it on the air, and I'm like, that was the greatest talent stats note I've ever had. Because how many times how many times indoors do you have weather on basketball? And I think the final one would be, for me personally, I was going to the Charleston Classic in 2015. I just had so many emails coming in. I don't like to text and drive, so I'm going to fly. So I fly from Charlotte to Charleston. This is when they changed the rules with the bags have to be in the food chain 45 minutes before. And I was scrambling. Like, I had a panic attack on the way to the airport, realizing that I might not get my bag checked. All my work stuff, all my charts, all my rulers, pens, hilers, everything, my whole traveling office, hole puncher. And I just checked everything. I didn't want to deal with it. And I missed the flight. So then I'm like, oh, it's only a set day. I'm okay. So I check the bag and I get my ticket for the next flight, because you got to be with your bag. You can't just go without it. So I actually drove home for lunch. I'm like, I'm going to go home and surprise my wife. So I went back to my car. I drove home for lunch because I got like 3.5 hours to kill. And, I pushed the envelope, and coming back to the airport, there was traffic and it was a big accident. So I missed my flight again. So now I missed 2 flights. And I go to the airport thinking I have to get my bag. And I'm just going to, at this point, I'm going to drive. But the bag went without me. The bag went without me to Charleston. I'm like, wait a minute, how could it? I thought you would park in your bag. And they go, well, that works most of the time. I'm like, oh my God, U.S. Air had just sent my bag to Charleston, South Carolina ahead of me. And I go home. I thought my wife was going to melt this. Why are you home again? I told her what happened. And now I had to grab some extra stuff, because now I'm driving. So I can pack a cooler, grab some beers for the hotel room. It's a whole different situation. Now you're driving. So it changed the whole thing. So I ended up driving. My bag made it to Charleston to the TV truck before me, and the runner texted me a picture of it when I got to the TV compound. That's probably my favorite travel story.
Well, I always love hearing travel stories because they make some of the best stories. So thank you for sharing those. Now, as we wrap up our time here, I get a lot of questions about what it's like working in sports broadcasting. What would you like for sports fans to know about our industry?
There's always 20 plus people behind the scenes working their butts off, whether it's the play-by-play, the utility, the camera operator that maybe drove 3 hours in the ice to get there. There's just people that just do this for a living, and it's hard. It is a grind. I mean, the hardest part about it is eating healthy on the road. It is really hard to stay healthy and to make the right choice, and you're just living out of hotels, and you're living out of cars, and you're living out of rental cars and airports and germs on planes. It's hard. It is a hard job to do, and there is some fun, glamorous moments, but it's a grind, and you gotta be really a kind of a special bird to do it. And you're in it because you like the people you work with. You connect with the people you work with. We have a phrase called the yuck value. You got to yuck it up once in a while. I don't care if you're flipping burgers, you're making podcasts, you're delivering the mail, you're collecting tolls, or you're producing a game on a national sports network. Like, you got to like what you do. And that's what I do. I like what I do, and that's why we do it.
Could you imagine yourself doing anything else?
Yes, I do. I want to do more social media. I really like it. I run 4 or 5 platforms now, mainly for Ross in the Chris Farrow Productions company, and the Charlotte Plan C thing I started in Charlotte with all the sports networking that we didn't talk about, won't have time to talk about. But I love doing that. And recruiting, when I was at ESPN, on one of my long-term goal things you had to fill out one time many years ago, I would like to work in recruiting. And I think I'd be really good at recruiting people for, I don't care what company it is. I would be good at listening to young people and trying to get them steered in the right direction. I don't care if I was my favorite brands. I love to work for Marriott or National Car Rental. I use them all the time. Those are my 2 favorite brands. I think when I get older, I joke with people I'd like to be a concierge at a Marriott lounge.
Well, I could definitely see you doing something like that with your attention to detail. One final question. How do young announcers or even announcers that are currently working get in touch with you to get some advice or maybe work on their reel or work on their announcing?
Oh, sure. It's ChrisFarrowProductions.com. Farrow like arrow, but with an F, no relation to Mia. So ChrisFarrowProductions.com is my website. That's how you can find me. They can learn about some of the consulting things I do, speaking engagements mainly to colleges, to young professionals, and talent feedback, along with some other stuff we do too. But there's always time to talk to somebody and maybe steer them in the right direction.
All right, that was Chris Farrow, longtime broadcast professional who's been a coordinating producer on college basketball for many, many years and has given many announcers their first shot at calling network sports. Chris is such a great guy, and after having worked with him again last December on college basketball, I've rediscovered that he has an incredible amount of passion for what he does, an amazing attention to detail, and he truly cares about developing announcers and production personnel. If you want to get some quick tips from those he's worked with, check out #Farrow Friday Focus, where Chris gets industry insider tips from sports and broadcast professionals. That's #Farrow Friday Focus, or visit his website at chrisfarrowproductions.com. On the next episode of Sports in the Making, I talk with Jenny Kavnar, the Colorado Rockies announcer on AT&T Sportsnet in Denver, Colorado. Jenny became the first woman in 25 years to have called a Major League Baseball game as a play-by-play announcer, so we'll talk about that historic event, how women are becoming a bigger presence in broadcast sports, and how she grew up learning baseball from her dad, who's a Colorado Hall of Fame coach. If you like this episode, be sure to like and share it on your social media channels, and positive reviews are appreciated. Also be sure to subscribe to Sports in the Making so you don't miss out on more episodes. If there's something that you would like to know more of in sports, drop me a line on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. You can also visit sportsinthemaking.com to catch up on previous episodes. I'm your host, Don Cardona. Thank you for listening to Sports in the Making.